as Ross said, I am a physician, and I come to you from Minnesota. That's why I say my O's that way. I'm really glad to be here. I'm really honored, actually. And you'll hear more about me as I do my, my talk. And you know, as typical with talks, I'm supposed to do about 25 things in 45 minutes. So if I start talking so fast that my words go together, somebody wave your hand and I'll slow down. I'm going to start by framing this as a way of looking at the world. Now, we're talking about adaptive leadership, and it's a body of ideas and words, and you all do it every day. So I want you to really think about, as we have this next 45 minutes, think about your work as leaders in quality improvement, but also think about yourselves as human beings trying to make the world better. And you know, the work that we're all here to think about is this really hard work about actually facing reality and looking at the way things are and the way things could be, and really addressing the gap between the way things are for our clinicians, our patients, our families, our colleagues delivering care, and how they could be, and how to really think about how to make our work every day meaningful and work smart to do really good and meaningful work, not to work harder, but to work smarter and to think about how to make progress on these problems in real time, and the goal being improved health of the population and really enhancing the experience of patients, but not forgetting the experience of the people who deliver care. Okay, it's an experience of everyone to really think about how together to do this work better and more joyfully, and to also really be responsible stewards of cost. Now, this is where you actually think I forgot my slides, and I brought my cardiology slides. And the fact is, these are my cardiology slides. We're going to start with a fundamental idea here as we start in this work about human beings. Now, we all have within us a really important reflex. And this is going to pertain to leadership, so just bear with me. So all of us have this reflex within us to protect us from what killed us in ancient times, which was blood loss due to trauma. So we all have within us this ability to respond when our blood volume drops, to create these magical chemicals called neurohormones to make our body hang on to salt and water so we can crawl back to our cave and fight again. It's in all of us, okay? If our blood volume drops, our blood vessels squeeze and we hang on to salt and water. Miraculous. It's in all of us. Problem is, okay, now modern day, no matter whether you're a clinician who takes care of somebody with heart failure, a family member, whatever, you know about the problem of congestive heart failure. It's a really common problem that plagues human beings. We're living longer, and now when our hearts fail from untreated hypertension or coronary disease. So now those pumps are weakened, and there's decreased flow to the body, and the body says, oh, I know what to do with that. Believe me, this has to do with leadership. I haven't forgotten what talk I'm giving. You're looking skeptical out there. Just hang with me. This decreased volume from heart failure triggers neurohormones, salt and water retention, and things get worse. Okay, so instead this decreased volume triggers that good old reflex. So now here we are, reflexes make things worse. That's the first thing I've said that's worth remembering. Okay, we've got reflexes, but reflexes now under modern conditions make things worse. What's the link to leadership? I think you invited me, and not just because I'm a cardiologist, not just because I'm interested in leadership, but your work is heart work. The heart of healthcare is really relationships. And I think that thinking about leadership, thinking about improving clinical quality at the front line, thinking about making the health of the population better is heart work. And it's based in relationships. Now, you think about your favorite colleagues, and they want things to get better too, right? But why is change hard? You want to make the future better, but it's really stressful. I don't know if any of these pictures look familiar. I don't know if you've ever seen anybody take a bite out of a computer. I haven't really seen that, although I have hit my head against a wall and yelled at my computer. And it's stressful to change because really smart people don't know what to do, and they don't like that. It's very stressful. So here's the link to the heart failure metaphor. I would say to you that the heart of healthcare is breaking. It's breaking under the strain of the things that are coming at us very fast. The pace of change is intense. And I think these things will resonate with you. The things that are straining the heart of health care is basically trying to think about health as opposed to just health care. It's not ignoring health care, but also think about the health of a population. Trying to think about how among teams or among primary care and specialists, how to share responsibility for patient care. Sounds like a great idea. Hard to think about how to do that, how to share accountability for care, how to deal with the high costs. You know many of these things here. Facing the fact that social determinants of health are really important in health, and how to think about behavior change in populations. How to think about seamless care across not only geography, but across age, across conditions. And trying to think about how to share decision making, how to use evidence base, how to create an evidence base while you're moving 1,000,000 miles an hour, telling your truth about how little of what we do actually has evidence, and how part of our work is to continue to create the evidence of best practice as we practice. And then this transition I know is happening in Canada like it's happening in the United States, which is this challenge to change from churning a volume of care into creating care, into doing care that's valuable, that actually makes a difference. It's really easy to say and really hard to do and really important. So this change creates strain. I haven't forgotten my metaphor here. I'm going to get back to it. Is instead of hearing people talk about getting the story right, people are thinking about going faster. Instead of people talking about their healthcare work as meaningful and rewarding, you more often hear draining and tired. Instead of trust, there's suspicion about who's on what side of what thing, who's going to get the needed resources. Instead of connection, there's fragmentation. Rather than thinking about healthcare as infinite potential, we're thinking about finite resources. And instead of being colleagues, we're often thinking about competing. So here's the link. This strain of change triggers a reflex. Okay? The reflex response to the strain of change, what we can't change, is fear. Okay? All of you as leaders in healthcare, this is what you deal with every day, is actually the reflex response to change is fear. The question we're going to think about tonight is, what do you do in the face of fear? What choice do you make as a leader trying to help others make progress in the face of fear? If unchecked, fear leads to some predictable things. It leads to some parallels to vasoconstriction and salt and water retention. It's stuff you don't need, like anger, suspicion, and withdrawal. Okay, so if you're trying to talk about change, trying to make improvements together, and everybody's afraid, and everybody gets suspicious and holds back, things don't get better, they get worse. Let me just check this out with you. Now, I apologize for starting from a specialist point of view, but I think everybody's learned it's best to talk about what you know, so that's where I start from. So as a specialist, what fear might look like is this. My expertise in training doesn't feel like it's valued. I've given up control, but I still got all the responsibility. Well, I have to work harder, and I'm already tired. Now, so that's the fear. So if it gets worse, what it might look like is I don't have time to spend time talking to other people. I mean, really? Talk more to other people? I don't have enough time in my day. I'm exhausted. I have nothing left for my family. I don't know who to trust. And if it gets worse, it might sound like I withdraw and keep my head down and hope this will all go away. That certainly happens here too, right? Okay. Primary care clinicians, not a lot different. Will my expertise and training be valued? I've given up control. I still got responsibility. The same things, I withdraw, keep my head down, hoping this will go away. And all of us know of colleagues, whether you're clinicians or non-clinicians, we all know about colleagues who get to the point where they quit and they stay, right? And think about what that does to a work environment and to joy at work. And then there's people like all of you who are trying to lead others. What a leader's fear might look like is, how do I help others make progress and face things as they are? And how do I help people see the growing expectations? And if that fear leads to that triggers that anger, suspicion, withdrawal, it can look like, well, everybody feels entitled to have things their own way. Nobody understands what I do as somebody trying to lead and help make things better, trying to improve things at the front line. And one might say, I'm just going to give up having a meeting and I'm just going to make a decision. They just have to deal with it. And more strain, too many crises to be creative. I just need to keep the lights on. And I wonder why things never get any better. Okay. So that's the link, is that I want you to think about how our reflexes, our reflex response to fear, can make things worse trying to lead change. And when we think about this work, in clinical quality improvement, it's all about really seeing the fear that the work you guys are holding up will scare your colleagues, not because of what they don't want to do, but what they don't know how to do. Okay, that's you think about really smart people who are doing the best they can in real time as fast as they can, and you'll have a whole new way of looking at the world. And the last thing smart people like to do is feel incompetent in public. Okay, that's the fear. It's not that, oh, you're going to make things better. We all want that. The question is, what's it going to take? So I think one of the ideas I want us to start with, before we get into this adaptive leadership, before we talk specifically about what this might look like here and in Alina, I want us to have a couple ideas. And one of the ideas that I want to really have you think about is how our reflex response to change and the fear of change thwarts us in the efforts in trying to make things better. And just this is the audience participation part. So if there's a bunch of introverts out there, this is your warning. I'm just going to tee up here. The camera's not going to come on you. The camera's on me. Okay, but just shout out. What are some fears in the world you're in? What are people afraid of in your work environments? This would be where you talk. Anybody? Increasing expectations, more work, right? Anything else? More scrutiny, yeah. Public reporting, more scrutiny, somebody looking over your back. And again, you know, smart people really, they want to do good work. They don't want to be found to be not doing good work. What else?
Things can't get better without money, and there is no money.
That things can't get better without money, and there's no money. So the fear that there's not the resources, that there's ideas here, we're getting our hopes up, and is there really the will and the resources to make it so? What else? I'm not doing as well as everybody else. Great. Well, thank you for, so they're out there, right? And this thing is, so what I want you to think about is this idea about adaptive leadership and helping people make progress in clinical quality is going to all be about making a different choice in the face of fear. Because that fear is going to be out there. The fears you named, it's there. It's in your hearts and minds. It's certainly in your colleagues. And the previous response is, I'm afraid, something's wrong, I'm going to hunker down, protect what's mine, hold my head down, hope this will all go away. Okay, what we're hoping to think about and what we talk about as we weave these concepts along with clinical quality improvement discipline is really to think about the fear that you will run into. Any project you bring to your colleagues, it's new, it's something different. You're scaring me, people. You know, you're taking me somewhere I don't want to go. I might not be able to keep up with you. It's a signal. It's a signal that as a person trying to lead change, you got to behave a little differently. Think about how to talk about, yes, this is hard, and how can we think together about creating a new reality. And that's really this making a choice in the face of fear is really what we're going to be talking about. Now, you came to hear about adaptive leadership and you were worried I wasn't going to get there. I'm there now, okay? So I want to bring this fear metaphor in to really sort of land that idea. Now let me tell you a little bit about Ron Heifetz. Ron Heifetz is the guy who wrote about adaptive leadership. And adaptive leadership is not a model. It's not a flavor of the month. It's not a, do plug and play sort of model. It's a language. It's a description about the human condition. And let me just tell you a couple things about him. So you might recognize that name Heifetz. You think, where have I heard that? Well, his grandfather is a famous musician, Jascha Heifetz. And Ron is a musician like his grandfather. And Ron is a physician, and he started out as a surgeon. And he was in his first year of surgery, he was in his surgery internship, and he was really just working really hard. He's about my age, I'm 58. So I put you in where he was in the time that I'm describing. So he was really getting exhausted in his surgery internship and not playing his cello. So he went to his program director and said, I want to take a year off so I can practice my cello. Program director said, okay. So he took a year off, and he decided to support himself by doing histories and intake physicals in Rikers Island Prison in New York. And he started doing that. He thought, whoa, this is really hard. These people have really difficult lives, difficult social conditions. They're poor. They've had bad stuff happen to them. And I am not getting excited about going back to my residency. I am still really struggling. I need another year off, but I can't keep doing this. This is too hard. So he went back to his program director and said, I need more time. So he got a second year off. And this time he went to Fifth Avenue and did intake histories and physicals on really wealthy people. And he was talking them up, and they were loving him. And his boss said, go faster, see more people. And the patient said, no, we love this. Somebody's talking to us. And so Heifetz's boss said, go slower, they're paying people. So he went slower, he engaged folks, and he thought, isn't this interesting? These really wealthy people who have money, they have position, they're just like those folks at Rikers Island. They're scared, they don't know where they fit, they don't know where they belong, they feel alone in this world. Aren't people interesting? So then he went and had a crucial conversation with his program director in surgery, and he went into psychiatry. Wouldn't that have been a moment? He did. He went to psychiatry, went to Harvard, and he finished his psychiatry training and found himself at one of the graduate schools at Harvard called the Kennedy School of Government, which is really a school of public service. So people from all over the world actually come to the Kennedy School for they have a 9-month master's program that's basically for people who've been out in the world trying to make it better, who are like really tired at about 40 and say, what is that all about? And come back for a sabbatical to the Kennedy School to really take courses and renew themselves and work on a master's in public administration. Well, Ross told you a little bit of my story. That's where I found myself. I was 40 years old. I was a teaching clinician when I finished cardiology training at our University of Minnesota. It was pretty clear after 7 years I wasn't going to be I could just see the handwriting on the wall. I'm not a researcher, I'm a teaching clinician. So I went to after 7 years, I went to one of the other teaching hospitals in the system so I could keep teaching. It was a county hospital, Ramsey. And I was running the coronary care unit so I could keep engaged at the medical school. I was there about 5 minutes, and the CEO came and took me out to breakfast. I should have known. And before we finished breakfast, I was suddenly chief of cardiology of a new merged group of this safety net hospital and a new managed care hospital coming together. And of course, there was urgency. Cardiology was to do things together, fast, more procedures. And we need somebody, and basically I was the least objectionable person to do it. So I was 40 years old, I had a big practice, I'm a nice person, and I had lots of energy, a big practice. But what I knew about leadership, I knew from being the drum major of my high school band with a big hat and a big stick, and I'd blow a whistle twice and 160 people would say, 1, 2. It's never been like that since. Okay? So I said yes, but I made the deal that this CEO would support me doing more training in leadership after I was a chief. Go figure. Got that backwards, but it's not too uncommon a story you might hear. It may be in some of your stories that you actually stepped up before you actually had the skills to actually do what you stepped up to do. Anyway, that was me. So I found there was a sabbatical program in Minnesota, a foundation that gave sabbaticals to mid-career leaders and physicians, and I got one of those after they hired the permanent chief of cardiology. I said I'd be the interim chief. I didn't know it'd take 3 years. Oh man, that was 3 years of, these are great guys that I knew in both these groups, the resistance and fighting and acting out it was really something. And I kept saying, look what the possibility, look what we can do together. And it took a lot of energy. And when I found myself in my sabbatical, I was in Heifetz's class thinking about what people do when they try and lead others and listening to the unfolding stories in Heifetz's class. It was like a light bulb went on. And I recognized that the resistance and the fear that I'd been seeing and the reactions to fear were really what I had no language to deal with as a physician leader. I was just trying to make a more compelling statement about how good it was if we could go forward. And Heifetz basically developed this language by listening to the stories of people like me coming back in mid-career talking about leading others. And his essential idea in adaptive leadership, and I'm going to go through some of the big ideas of that for you tonight and link it to clinical quality improvement. The main idea, as I have up here, is that people don't change until they feel fear. They don't get up one morning and say, okay, I'm done resisting, I'm in a good mood, let's go there. Let's do that program. They actually see the need to change. They feel that press in their back that it's time to do something different. So this idea of how we as leaders help people hold that fear and talk about it differently. I didn't have language to do that. I didn't have eyes to see it as a young chief of cardiology. I just kept putting out fires and hoping it would all get better and got myself all tired in the meantime. We made progress, but it was really slow, and I couldn't read the signals of the human condition like I suddenly could after I really saw differently learning about adaptive leadership. So I hope to offer you a little bit of that. What adaptive leadership is, it's really language to describe what people do. You know, and in clinical quality improvement projects, it's people. It's what people do when they try and do new stuff together, okay? So it's about what people do, but most importantly, it's what people like you who lead can do if you see differently what's in front of you. Okay? I hope you're going to leave here tonight knowing that you actually practice adaptive leadership every day. You can just practice it better if you actually do it more mindfully. So that's what this is about. Adaptive leadership is really a way of talking about being an engaged organizational citizen. It's really about group dynamics. But most importantly, it really resonates with clinicians because it's also really about the skills that really, where you really connect with a patient or a family in a ED, in an exam room, in the emergency room. It's language that really resonates with clinicians. This is now the language of leadership in all the big health systems in Minnesota for sure, and in the Midwest, and it really resonates with people because you'll see, and I'm going to point that out in our programs at Alina. We really stress the way that this language is really the language of thoughtful, astute clinical care. So let me see if I can convince you. Okay, looking at the time here. Oh, great, yes, 45 things in 45 minutes. I'm going to be okay. Glad I have time up here. Okay, so I'm going to talk about 5 ideas. And these are sort of 5 big ideas that I hope will really get you excited about reading Heifetz's book, which I would say I recommend to you. It's called Leadership on the Line. Leadership on the Line. It's a fast read, and if you pay attention in the next half hour, you'll read it really fast because I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes in an applied version. Okay. Now this list probably looks kind of boring and uninteresting to you now, but I promise you it'll be riveting and you'll know what it means by the end of this talk. Okay. We're going to talk about 5 ideas about the idea there's a productive range of tension where you can get things done, the difference between technical and adaptive work, the difference between leadership and authority, this idea about reflecting in action, and the concept of work avoidance. So here we go. First idea is that there has to be tension to make progress on work. Okay. Now, if you think about the projects you have in mind or clinical quality improvement work, there's some tension. There's something that needs to happen. Okay. So think about that link. And Heifetz's language comes from a whole body of people's work. Yerkes and Dodson were a couple psychologists from Harvard who did this work that demonstrated nicely here that there has to be some juice or some tension for stuff to happen. Those of you who are athletes know this. It's a training effect. Or those of you who are physiologists know this. The heart has to fill with a certain amount of blood to pump well. The idea being that there has to be some stress for this optimum stimulation, for creativity, for people to really engage. Okay? And this time in our culture, there's a lot of people are overstimulated off the end of the curve, right? All right, so they're taking a drink from a fire hose. Okay, a lot of people are out here. They're just there's some tension, but there's too much, and some of you said that more work, more stress, too much. So here's how Heifetz describes this, and this is an important concept that we talk about in our clinical quality improvement courses all the time. We talk about how do you keep people in a productive zone of tension? How do you keep people engaged in the work? If people are over their limit of tolerance, they're up here. If they think this isn't their work, they're below the threshold of learning. So the whole idea here, the first big idea here, and it's short, doesn't mean I'm almost done with my talk. The first idea is short. Okay, the first idea is there is a productive zone of tension in which people can get work done. Okay, so thinking about how to keep, in these projects, we talk about how to keep this zone wide and how to bring people back in the zone when they've fallen out. We'll talk about how you know a little bit later. But this first idea is there's a productive zone of tension, but the tension's not bad. There has to be some tension to make progress. So here's what it might sound like for a patient. Okay? The productive zone of tension might sound like this blue letters here. I understand the reality of my condition. I'm looking to you for guidance and honesty, and I understand what I need to do. Okay? Now, if the patient's over the top, above that threshold of tolerance, it might sound like, I don't want to hear any more bad news. I'm going to fire you if you tell me anything bad. Or I can't make any sense of this, or I'm terrified and I can't, your mouth is moving, but I don't understand a word you're saying. Okay? Well, likewise, if a patient is below the threshold, when they might say, give me a pill, do your latest and greatest magic, just make it go away. I don't want to do anything hard, just do something. Okay? Or if you're in leadership, you know, people might stick their head in the sand, or they might just like say, just too much when they're over the top. Or down here, this is my cat, Rosie, and this says, dear God, when will this presentation end? They might just think, this is not my problem. Okay? All right. So you survived the first idea. There's a productive zone of tension. Okay, now, idea number 2. This is what Heifetz is most famous for, this distinction. There'll be a little audience participation coming up, so just get ready. Okay? So there's 2 types of problems, technical and adaptive. All right? Now, a technical problem is when we know the answer and we need to apply it. And most of the people, if you're leading a team, if you're thinking about a team, if you're thinking of putting together a team, you're probably thinking you know the answer. You just got to get those people out there to do it. I'm going to convince you that you might be thinking about that wrong. But a technical problem, the answer already exists. You just want to apply it. Adaptive work is when people need to learn new behaviors deeply and broadly in organizations. Now let me use a medical example. You know, sorry, another cardiology example, but it's my world. Okay, here this guy's having an MI. He's squeezing his chest. He's got chest pain, sweating. He's got ST segment changes on electrocardiogram. Clearly having a heart attack. So let's just say he's in Toronto and he goes to a place, a hospital that has a cath lab. Okay, he goes into the emergency room. People recognize what's wrong with him. He gets whisked off to the cath lab. A cardiologist puts a catheter in his right femoral artery, takes pictures of his coronary artery, sees a blood clot in an artery, opens up the artery and puts a stent in it. That's all technical work. Lots of expertise, lots of stuff's got to work, but it's all technical. Pulling teams together, ideas on the shelf, ways of doing things, technical. Okay. Then the patient goes from the cath lab with an open artery to the coronary care unit or whatever that particular institution happens to call the next place you go. And there, the patient has their attention held on new work that they've got to do by the doctors and nurses caring for them. Now that patient's got to do really hard things. They've got to do something that people in our North American culture deny, which is mortality. They have to face the fact they just about died. Because you know, I think it's true in Canada, like in the United States, that people pretend death is optional, right? And suddenly something bad happened. They're like, whoa! So they got to deal with that. They also suddenly now they've survived a heart attack. They've got to get in the right relationship with their family. That's not easy. They have to treat their depression, lose weight, lower their cholesterol, treat their diabetes, lower their high blood pressure. Basically, do a lot of hard things. Now, this is the thing cardiologists don't tell you. What do you suppose prevents the next heart attack? Is it that stent, or is it the choices that patient makes? Yeah, okay. Choices the patient makes. And that's really hard work. And the leadership work is by the doctors and nurses is to hold that patient's attention on the work, but they can't do it for them. Okay? So that's the difference between technical and adaptive work. Let me give you one more example. Budgets. Now, budgets are math problems, right? You were talking about money. Somebody's talking about money before. You know, budgets are just this minus this equals this, right? Why is everybody unhappy at budget time? What's happening? Trade-offs, difficult conversations, right? We don't do this, we do that. That's the adaptive work, okay? So the math part's the technical. The difficult conversations, the adaptive work. Now, for those of you graphically inclined, let me just show you what this looks like. So here's that graph that I showed you, okay? That productive zone of tension. Here's that technical fix. So like an artery closes, open the artery. Distress goes up, do the technical fix, distress goes down. This is a graphic of what adaptive work looks like. Okay, whether it's a clinical quality improvement project or whatever. Now, this graph suggests that you got to keep things in this productive zone of attention over time. Now, it's a graph. There's three reasons that this is wrong. Okay, if I was drawing this true to form, I did my homework before this. I know that's east. If this was true to form, this would go to the Maritimes. Okay, adaptive work takes longer, and that's why we avoid it. All right, we say, I can't do the right thing. It takes too long. I'm going to do the thing I can do. Sound familiar? I saw some knowing looks. Okay, so that's one reason this graph isn't right. The other reason it's not right is if you're leading a team, do they stay in the productive zone all the time? Not so much. They go over the top and start yelling at you, okay? And then you do something and they bring them down. Then they say, oh, good, you're going to do all the work. And then they go to sleep. They're down here. So I know that they don't stay in the productive zone all the time. More about that later. The other thing about this that I really want to draw to your attention that goes right to the science of clinical quality improvement is look at all these little humps here are all different. Now you might say, well, you're just a dumb PowerPoint drawer. You can't draw very well. No, I'm not very good, but these are all different because they're all experiments. Okay? Leading is making it up as you go along. You try something, and then you try something else. Now this is the time when doctors go, ha, see, I knew it. You leaders are just making it up as you go along. And then what I say is, and so what is clinical medicine? Making it up as you go along. You try things, and the idea is, what are you trying to do? You're trying in the best interest of patients. You try a drug. You say, how'd that go? Do I need more of that? Less of that? Welcome to the human condition. We're always making things up as we go along. And that's true in leadership. But the idea is to try and make things up, to try things. And the key thing that most of us don't do is we don't look and see what happened next. Okay? More about that later. So here's coming up. I'm coming up to the audience participation part. Okay? So the work that you guys, as a committed community of leaders, are holding and thinking about is this idea about how to improve the quality and safety outcomes for patients in this province. Okay? You're thinking about clinical and non-clinical service delivery processes. You're thinking about working across disciplines. You're thinking about reducing waste and minimizing variation. You're thinking about how to learn together, how to learn about best practices together. Okay? Okay, so why is that hard? Sounds good. Why don't we just do it? Why is it hard? This would be, again, where you talk. I'll repeat what you say so that the people out there can hear. Why is it hard? Takes time. Who's got time? Okay, good. Takes time. What else? Sometimes it's ego, and I'm going to take that comment and make a little generative turn on it and say people have different points of view about that. See what you're asking them to do differently than you might be seeing the problem, and it can be ego. It can be a variety of things. So there's different points of view. What else?
Can't do it on your own.
Can't do it. You need lots of people, right? What else? Does everybody know how to do this? It is. Yeah, it may not be competent. It's really important. People, to looking incompetent in public is really hard for bright people. How to go to unknown territory together and look each other in the eye and say, I don't know. Okay, or I was wrong. And the thing you touched on is letting go of the way it was, right? Another thing about human beings, we'll hang on to something that doesn't work, but if we know it, at least we know it. So it means loss. Anything else about what makes this work hard? The unknown, right? Lots of variable, lots of stuff coming at you, right? And then there's also, what do people do when they get scared? There's all sorts of new and creative ways people resist the work, right? All right. So what you've done as an audience, very nicely, is describe the characteristics of adaptive work. Okay. What you as a community of learning are doing, you're tackling adaptive challenges. They feel it. Well, we see it at Alina every time. It's like a light bulb effect. People come in with they say, we're going to move this indicator 5%, or we're going to start this new process. Just watch. We're going to have a order set or a whatever. And then everybody goes, ah, and things start falling apart. And they're like, What's that? It's like, that would be human beings, because it's not technical. People start these projects thinking about them very technically, and then they discover what you all just really very nicely described, the characteristics of adaptive work. In adaptive work, there's a gap between the way things are and the way things could be. There's different points of view. People see it differently. There's new learning that has to happen, and people have to give up old ways, which they don't want to do. People have to learn new things in public. You see, you guys nailed them all. It's the people with the problem who've got the problem, who really have the responsibility to solve it. So when you do these projects, you don't do them to your colleagues. You help your colleagues see how to do them, given the resources, given the time, given the workflow. It takes longer. You nailed that one right away. It means trying things. It means trying things. In these projects, it's gathering the data, describing what's true, and then looking at it together and saying, what does the data tell us? What does it tell us about how we're doing now, and how do we watch ourselves improve? And then this last thing, which leaders spend a lot of time working with, is adaptive problems generate lots of clever, creative forms of resistance. So here's probably the second thing I've said that's worth remembering. The most common cause of leadership failure is treating an adaptive problem with a technical fix, and we do it all the time. We say, oh, please don't make me do the adaptive work. Okay? It's just too hard. But I want you to really think about this. Think about some of the problems you're dealing with in your professional work. By the way, I didn't really say this. All this stuff works at home too. Wherever there's people, this stuff works. Okay. So your spouses should be on alert. Okay. So if you don't really know about the difference between a technical and adaptive problem, if you're not sure, here's some clues. When people's hearts and minds, not just their preferences, have to change, that's adaptive work. By process of exclusion, when you try technical fix and you're back there again, and you've tried a series of them, that's probably an adaptive problem. And here's the ones that are really most helpful. When people are yelling at each other, when there's conflict, there's an adaptive problem. Because there's those points of view that you talked about and others did are being yelled out in the form of conflict, but they're really representing points of view on the difficulty of this problem. And crisis is a good indicator. Okay. And in healthcare in general, we have done a whole bunch of technical fixes for adaptive change. Okay. And if you think about the big problem that I mentioned when we started, this whole challenge we're facing about thinking about volume of care and value of care, whoa, that's really hard. But how we've really treated that very technically. Okay, so adaptive work is really work that diminishes the gap between the way things are and the way things need to be to make a better future. And adaptive leadership is the activity that mobilizes people to do that work. Okay? So really what we do in these clinical quality improvement cohorts is really help people see that the way they're calling their colleagues' attention to the work, the way they're engaging the stakeholders in the project, is really a mobilization of really trying to help keep people making progress on the work. So you'll hear Todd Allen talk about the practice of medicine changing from this craft-based practice to a profession-based practice. How to think about this change from individuals working alone and tailoring unique solutions for individual patients to this team-based approach of care, of how to work together as peers and coordinate care delivery and do the work together of improving processes in real time and trying together to create actually less expensive, less complex, and better outcomes for patients. It's possible. In fact, it's the hope for our profession. The waste that we can get at if we learn together and basically gather the truth from how we're practicing and trying to make sense of the variation we see, to vary in our procedures and practices when it makes sense for patients, and to standardize when it makes the work easier, is really the work, the leadership work that this really requires. So really, in thinking about this, finishing the second idea, is you got to know. I was talking to one of you before the meeting, and this person said something very wise, which I'm going to say here, is that you got to know what you're doing before you do this work. You got to know what problem you're tackling. So a really important concept that usually is an aim statement in these quality improvement projects is, what is the work? What's the gap you're trying to do? What's the current state, and what's the desired state? And then the project is really doing the work to cross that gap. And one a really important thing in terms of sizing projects, and really Ross was talking about that, is he's calling you to think about ideas and really talk about projects, and is to think about something big enough to be meaningful that you can't already do, all right, but small enough to be manageable so you can make some progress and build some collective confidence. All right, now I did my Canadian homework. Who's this? Well, now you guys don't know who this is. I'm gonna, I did my homework. I watched a 3-hour video on this guy to be ready for you. Is this a picture of authority or leadership? It's Tommy Douglas, in case you don't know who it is. It's a bad picture. See, okay, now you're nodding. Okay, all right. You weren't too sure. You thought that Minnesotan doesn't know who Tommy Douglas is. Who is that? That's who that is. Okay, so authority or leadership? Okay, why? Yeah, you can't mumble here. Tell me what? I'm sorry, what? Medicare. Okay. So say more about that. So leadership, Medicare. What did he do? Why did you not say authority? Because if I got my homework right, he was premier in Saskatchewan. He was a member of Parliament, right? So he had the authority. But why'd you say leadership instead of authority? I won't pick on you, but you can answer.
Well, he was up against a lot of resistance. People just didn't want to do it. They felt it was just throwing money after that and all that kind of good stuff. But he was able to influence that.
So he made progress in spite of resistance, was able to influence and move things forward when it was really hard. Okay? And why didn't you say just authority? Because he was authority. He was both, wasn't he? But they're different, aren't they? I mean, you can feel that just in you guys went right to boom, leadership. But you felt that because you could feel the difference between authority and leadership. That's my point. There's a difference between the authority and how you use it, the exercise of leadership. That's the third big idea, okay? And this idea, you know it, you feel that it's different. And what we talk about in our programs is that leadership is an activity. It's how you use yourself every day. So if you're a clinician, you happen to have a 0.1 leadership job, you don't get to act like a leader 0.1 and 0.9 be criticizing all the leaders, right? That probably doesn't happen in Canada. But this idea is that this is an activity. It's how you use yourself all day long, right? So, and the idea is authority, power, and influence are tools, but they don't guarantee leadership. So authority is necessary but insufficient. And authority is important because it organizes us. You think about Tommy Douglas's life. His willingness to step into public service and take official roles was critical to organizing the province of Saskatchewan in those days. And so that authority does important things. It creates order, it creates some protection and stability to get work done, but it's insufficient to move problems along. Now authority, yours or his, we'll use yours now, we'll switch over to you. Whether you've got a title, many of you in this room have a title, but you're all people of influence, or you wouldn't be sitting here on an evening when you could be home with your kids, okay? You're all people who move others, you're all people that Ross and his colleagues know are people who make things happen. You're all people of influence. But you know that whether you have influence or a title, people look to you and they expect stuff, okay? You have influence to the extent that you actually can help people move things along, right? And your influence goes up as when you meet people's expectations, and your influence goes down when you don't meet their expectations. What I want you to do is think for a minute. Think about somebody you go to with a problem. Just think of them in your mind's eye. So your favorite person to go to with a problem. Okay, now think of you have them in your mind's eye. Now think about going to them and asking them for advice, and they give you bad advice. And you apply their advice, and things don't go very well. Do you go to them the next time so quickly? No. Okay? So the idea is that authority, whether it's formal or informal, has strings attached. You have power proportional to people's expectations that you will deliver. It's just a fact. Okay? So this idea that Tommy Douglas embodies really is really thinking about how to use authority to influence, but to influence constructively. Okay? So it's like he basically, he could actually raise difficult issues and help people begin to face the things that they needed to face, that they didn't want to face, and put some of his credibility on the line. Not all of it, but enough of it to really change the conversation. As I understand his story, he changed lots of conversations to really focus on what he thought was good for the people of Canada. So it's this idea in leadership, and it's in true and clinical quality improvement, your ability to influence others, to look at your work in new ways, is really what you got to build in order to help people make care better. And so this third idea is really that we weave into our curriculum is the developing your ability to influence others constructively. And it really requires several things. The reference is down here. This comes from a guy named Dr. Charles Dwyer. It's called The Shifting Sources of Power and Influence. I liked how he broke down this. I mean, Heifetz talks a lot about the difference between informal and formal authority, but I think it's important to think about, okay, you got informal authority, how do you use it? So in these projects, and this is really important, several of you named this. First and foremost, you're going to try and influence a clinician on the front line to do something differently. This sounds like ridiculous, but it's really important. They actually have to be able to do what you're asking. Okay? And just because you think that person's smart and they should know, don't assume they do. I'm not suggesting being patronizing. That doesn't go well either. But to really help people understand what it is you're asking them to do. Very important. People have to be able to do what you're asking. Okay? Secondly, they need to see what's in it for them. And that doesn't mean in a it means think about what's a big enough vision of why this is important that can include them. It's not giving into some meaningless vision you don't believe in. It's really trying to create something big enough that creates pull forward. This is true in all the projects that you would be thinking about. The next one is really important. You have to earn trust. Earn trust. It's not like, well, who wouldn't trust me? I'm such a nice person. You have to earn trust. And what we talk about in our projects is you earn trust by doing work together in new ways. You don't just say, you should trust me because of my title or because of who I've been. It's basically, we talk about mutual purpose and mutual respect as really important ways of earning trust. And then these last two, you got to speak to their perception of risk and their perception of cost. You're going to start hearing that perception word. Just let you be really annoyed with it because I'm going to talk about it more now. So here's a formula for those of you who like formulas. So here's a way of thinking about it. Your ability to influence somebody in your clinical quality improvement project is an equation. It's basically their ability to do the work plus the product of their perception of the potential benefit. Why is the project you're talking about important? And times their perception of the probability the benefit will really happen, minus their perception of cost, and I don't mean financial cost. I'll tell you about cost I mean, and their perception of risk. But this is the hard part. This is that human thing again. It's all about perception. Theirs, not yours. This is what I didn't understand when I was a young chief of cardiology. I didn't understand that all my partners were behaving so badly because they were scared about their salaries, about the culture, about each other. It was their perception that the change of bringing these two groups together was going to be bad for them. I thought it was great. I could see the possibility of saving a safety net hospital with a disciplined approach to practice, but their perception was loss, loss, loss. And I didn't have the ability to understand that as a leader, then this is what makes leadership really hard. Whether it's in clinical quality improvement or in your administrative roles, it's about their perception, not what you see, and how to help them make progress at a reasonable rate. So here's a quote, George Bernard Shaw. The single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that took place. Okay, so now just to think about this influence thing. When my mouth's moving and your mouth's moving, that's the technical part. When we actually understand each other and are communicating, that's the adaptive part. It's hard to really do that work. And you're thinking again, you're imagining new work now with busy people going 100 miles an hour, and just because you say it loud doesn't mean it lands, right? It's how do you create understanding? How do you create a shared understanding of the work you're trying to do together? Well, you're gonna make a couple errors, and so will the people you're trying to influence. When you're trying to move work ahead, you will actually tend to overfocus on the gain. Okay, so think about it. So you think this is the greatest project in the world. Okay, but you're going to tend to get in love with the gain of your project, but you have to really help others see that. Okay, but you're going to overfocus on the gain of your project, and you're going to overfocus on how just fabulous and trustworthy you are, and forget you have to earn that trust. Okay, and the person you're trying to influence, or the group you're trying to influence, is going to make another error. They're totally going to overfocus on all the bad things you're going to bring to them. If somebody's going to attack me, you're going to tell me, right? You guys, every once in a while, you guys all shift at the door, and I'm waiting for something to happen. Okay. You should see your eyes collectively go. So it's just a little unnerving. It's okay. I've had. Oh, okay. I've had people in gorilla suits come through the door while I'm talking, so anything's happened to me. So okay. Anyway, the idea they will focus on all the bad stuff. So here's what I want what we teach our groups to talk about, because what happens, people come into these quality improvement projects and they are gung ho. They are just like, ooh, the chief clinical officer picked me. I must be really great. And then they think, and then they go do their first data collection, and people start yelling at them, and they're like, wait a minute. I didn't sign up for this. I have a day job. Okay? And what we teach them is to bring those stories back and say, this is great. You're getting resistance. And they're like, are you kidding me? And we're like, no, you basically got their attention. The resistance is saying you're losing influence. How are you going to refine your strategy to keep this project going? So that resistance is your friend. It's a signal you're losing influence, and that you need to think about how to help people make progress. And you need to clarify your intention, refine your approach, and try again. There's that making it up as you go along. It's kind of like quality improvement of your influence, okay? But resistance is it's telling you something. It's not people getting up trying to ruin your day, okay? The costs you're asking are real. You're asking people to give up their time and energy, and this is important here. When you're asking people to do these projects, you want to be thinking about, okay, we need to do this. Let's get your ideas about how. To professionals, whether they're doctors or nurses or administrators, we all like autonomy. We do, okay? And it's not to get rid of autonomy. It's to put it in productive balance with accountability, right? That's really what this work is all about. So how can you not make people feel like they're giving up everything, but they're facing some realities they need to face, but engaging their imagination about how to tackle that. So giving people options helps with their perceptions of cost. With their perception of risk, there's that fear thing again that we've talked about. When you come asking them to do something different, they're saying to themselves, am I getting it over my head? Am I just saying yes to you and now everybody's going to hate me because I'm hanging out with you and I'm doing this new project? What's this going to mean? What is this improvement stuff about? How can you talk about it as part of how work gets done? Okay? And when people start resisting you, actually, you think it's willful, but sometimes they actually can't tell you why you're scaring them. You're just scaring them, okay? So I'm building up to some kind of hard news here. This is sort of my third big idea for you. Okay, people will trust you when you fulfill their expectations, their wants and needs. They send you to a meeting, you come back with the goods, they say, I am so glad we sent you. Then you go to another meeting, and you come back and you say, that thing we wanted, here's what I think we got to think about this differently. You say, who sent you? Who are you? Okay, so all your credibility goes poof. Okay, so here's what you actually are signing up for. Okay, Ross didn't quite tell you this, but this is it. Exercising adaptive leadership means disappointing people's expectations at a rate they can tolerate. Or, in plain language, doing clinical quality improvement at the front line means disappointing people's expectations that things will stay the same at a rate they can tolerate and not ignore you, try and silence you, or resist you in creative ways. Okay? That's why this is hard, because when you're doing new work, you're going to scare people. And thinking about how in doing this teamwork, this work in new ways, you can set a great example. How we talk a lot about appreciation and actually recognizing that clinicians, one of the uniform truths about people who care for people, whether they're doctors, nurses, administrators, is we're all kind of appreciation junkies. If somebody actually appreciates something we do, we'll do lots more of it. But we never do that, do we? We kind of starve each other out and wait for somebody to say, gotcha. Okay, so just celebrating appreciation as a leadership maneuver, to really appreciate when you get the data, when people come to the meeting to talk about the data, when people appreciate people actually speaking up when they see another way of, thank you, of going about things. Talking about why it's important. This idea of how you use yourself to ask questions. This idea of listen is actually really important in these in developing leadership to do this kind of work. We talk to folks about, are you hearing what your stakeholders are saying, or is your mind going 1,000 miles an hour and you're reloading with your rebuttal? So you're not even paying attention. Okay? That takes your project backwards rather than, can you really, because what we talk a lot about is stakeholders and their perspectives. You know, you talk about several perspectives on adaptive work. Hearing the different points of view and what it's telling you need to do. Okay. Don't worry, don't panic. I see that it's 6:09, and you out there in TV land, we will be done at 6:30. I've just got 2 more ideas, and this one's really fast. Okay, 4th big idea. It's short, but it's important. If you can't do this, you actually can't lead in this way. Okay, you have to be able to act and watch yourself act. Now, Heifetz uses a musical metaphor. He talks about you have to be on the balcony, okay, and be able to look at the pattern of the dance. You have to dance and be on the balcony watching yourself dance. Okay. Now you might say, that sounds weird. I can't do that. Now you're telling me I can't lead. So let me run this by you. If you've ever been in a meeting and your mouth's moving, you're talking, and you say to yourself, this isn't going well. You're doing it. All right? Now the good thing about people in healthcare is they do this. People who are in education, healthcare, they do this because they work with other people. They're sort of watching the response of other human beings. So this idea is you have to be able to dance and keep the pattern of the dance in mind. You have to do both, back and forth. It's like this graph. You see the faces in the goblet, okay? But if you notice, it's an active process. It's kind of like a zoom lens, isn't it? You have to kind of tune in. So this is an active process. You can't just say, you know, I like that balcony. People aren't yelling at me up there. I'm going to go sit there. No. You have to do both. You have to go back and forth. So one of the things you see we talk about is you can't sit on the balcony like these guys and just criticize people, okay? And this is a more likely thing in healthcare. I'll just do it myself. If I want this project done, I'll just do it myself. Because when you do that, you actually disable what you're trying to build, okay? So this is a concept. This is a whole other part of how we use this. This is called a polarity map, and I'm not going to really go into that too much now, but I'm going to talk about, you know, this is trying to do adaptive work, going from problems that keep reoccurring to making progress on adaptive work. So this is the work. And that we're managing this tension between balcony and dance floor. The idea is if you go back and forth, you get the upsides of both. You get the idea that you can see patterns and get insights and reevaluate your assumptions from the balcony. But when you're on the dance floor, you're engaged, you're credible, you know the work, people know, you know how people feel, and they trust you because you know the work. Okay? So that's the idea, is to really see the upsides of both of those things. If you overfocus on one at the expense of the other, if you sit out on the balcony and become this team leader who's disengaged, critical, checked out, and manipulating others, good luck with that. You're going to get nowhere. But likewise, if you're the kind of person who, and there's a lot of us in this room, myself included, tend to pile the work on themselves. You get lost in overworking and you can't see the big picture. So the idea is keeping the dance in mind, keeping the project, the team in mind, how we're doing, and what's my part of this. See, that wasn't so bad. Last idea. We're almost done. Oh, okay. Is that people will tell you by their resistance that they're not in the productive zone of tension. So we're going to call that work avoidance. So here's that graph again. Here's the productive zone of tension, technical and adaptive. So you've seen this graph before. All I changed was the title. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it more realistic. This is what it's like when you're leading people, isn't it? They get over the top, you do something, they go to sleep, then you do something else, and they get distressed, and you're kind of managing people's perception of the work. Okay? And just so you know that I'm living in the world, I know everybody's different, and that I'm different every day, that how I care for myself as a person leading matters, and that this productive zone of tension can vary. It's a way of thinking about this, but the point is, your job is to try and keep everybody in this productive zone as much as possible going forward, and it constantly changes, just like clinical medicine, by the way. Okay, so there's another metaphor Heifetz uses, is heat. When you're in the productive zone, things are cooking along. When you're over that limit of tolerance, the heat's too high. When you're below the threshold of learning, the heat's too low. See there's that little chafing dish with that dinky little flame? Nothing's happening, right? So the heat's too low here, heat's just right, heat's too high. Okay, now here's the next big thing that's really worth you remembering, is people's behavior will tell you where they are, okay? And the idea we're talking about tonight, just to try and get you interested in this body of work, is that when people start blaming others, usually you, okay, or distracting attention, very creative ways of doing that, which I'll go through in a minute, or denial, these sort of behaviors, what they're telling you is they're outside the productive zone. Now here's the zinger. People who are over the top and people who are down here look the same. Now if you don't get anything else out of tonight, get that. Because in your teamwork and the work you're going to be doing in this area, this is like one of the most important things people take away from this leadership work when tying it with clinical quality improvement, is the resistance they see isn't because people are here. It's because they're here. But in healthcare, we almost always think resistance means people just don't care. There they are, they just don't care. And what I want you to just understand is when you see resistance, all it's telling you is they're outside the productive zone. Now, you can figure out where they are. We're going to go through that really fast, but people don't wear little dials to tell you. But what the resistance tells you is they're not with you. And what it means for you as a leader, as somebody leading a team, is you need to try something to see if you can help them get better. Okay? But let me just slow it down a little bit. This resistance looks various ways. So this, first of all, the blaming can look like killing the messenger, scapegoating. Okay? Here's where the creativity is. Okay? I'm going to just describe some examples, and an audience moment is coming. Okay? I am watching time, Ross, but I'm doing my best here. Okay. So, pretending to be busy. Somebody sees you coming, they'll go off and change the subject. Or taking the problem, making it so small that you already can do it. Your teams are going to try that. You just watch for that in some of the aim statement. They're going to be able to say, hey, let's just scope this project to a place we already can do it. And then we'll check the box and we'll be rock stars. Okay? Or they make the problem so big they're trying to boil the ocean. Our health systems, in Minnesota, restructuring and reorganizing is a favorite form of work avoidance. Don't expect anything, we're changing chairs. Okay? And then here's the kind of work avoidance I bet some of the people in this room are guilty of, is having meetings where only information is exchanged. Heaven forbid we talk to each other because we might yell at each other. So you pack the agenda so tight so nobody will yell, and you don't talk about anything meaningful. Why do people hate meetings? Right? Or picking a fight. In other words, there's a zillion ways. I mean, it can be emails in caps. It can be yelling on the phone. It can be silence. Resistance shows up in all sorts of ways. And again, this works at home. And you know lots about this because you're human beings. You live the human condition. You can read other people. You know yourself. So, audience, what are some favorite forms of work avoidance that you've seen? Let the crowd out there in the webinar know that you're thinking here. What's some work avoidance you see out there? Not my job. What else? Too busy. Does anybody want more data? Just give me more data. More budget. Can't do it. There's no money. Can't possibly do it. What else? Say it again. Don't believe the data. Right. We're different. That's our practice is different. It's just not. Yeah. We don't believe the data. If we don't all do it, it won't work. Okay. Make it so big it's impossible. So. Say it again? Death by 1,000 cuts. Yes, death by 1,000 cuts. So the point is, you guys get this. So what I want you to think about that resistance is telling you something. So here's, back to the graph here. I know this is getting annoying, but I want to show you that you actually already know what this graph shows. So all I did is change the title. So it says work avoidance signals being out of the productive zone. So here's what I added to the graph, just this blue line, is that basically people avoid the work when the heat's too low or when it's too high. So it's a signal. Remember we said resistance is a signal that you're losing influence. I call it organizational chest pain. You see why it makes sense that a cardiologist does this? Resistance is organizational chest pain. Okay, so the point is, are you reading, and when you're thinking about this teamwork or your next meeting or your next family discussion about the vacation you're going to take, okay, the resistance is telling you something. It's telling you people are they're not productively engaged in what you're talking about, okay? So what do you do? Okay, so this is going in terms of thinking about how this might apply in this work that you're considering. Is we have our teams each time we meet think about, okay, where are your stakeholders? What are you going to which groups are above the limit of tolerance? Which groups are engaged you don't want to lose sight of? Which groups need to really have the heat turned up on them to really step into the work? And we talk a lot about all the things you do every day. You already know how to do this. How you lower the heat is you validate, you say, I'm sorry, you acknowledge this is hard, you break the work down, you break it into pieces, and then this idea of restoring and allocating resources, which can be your attention, it can be time, it can be some training, it can be slowing the work down, it can be adding some expertise from outside. So these, when I have, what we do with the teams is we actually, before I show this slide, I have people tell stories about when they've lowered the heat and what they've done. They tell stories, they know how to do it. The trick is they don't think about what comes next. So stay with me for a minute. Then there's also raising the heat, raising standards, increasing accountability, changing the test, something more motivating. We've talked about these things. Now this is the zinger, okay? Remember, I've already showed you this graph. Here's what I want to leave you with, okay? Exercising leadership means having an experimental mindset. Okay? It means looking at the work avoidance and trying stuff, okay? Now here's the point. If you try something and it makes things worse, stop doing that. Now you laugh. Now I want you to see with new eyes out there the times the people you're kind of cranking on and things get worse. And you crank on them a little bit more and it gets worse. And you crank on them a little more, like, see, those lazy people. And a lot in healthcare, laziness can be exhaustion. All right? And so this idea that, you know, resistance is telling you something is really important. Okay? It really can tell you that it tells you people are outside the productive zone. And here's what I want you to think about. In healthcare, as you're thinking about this work, as you're thinking about your daily work tomorrow, when people are resisting, try lowering the heat first. Remember, they look the same. And the mistake we usually make is we push harder on people. If we could actually say, this is really hard. I see your point. Let's break it down. Let's take a step. Let's try this. Look, see this work. Now let's try this. What do you need to make progress? And this idea, one of the things I want to say about lowering the heat in healthcare, you know, we're all kind of, you know, we're kind of into suffering and saying how hard we work. This isn't, in this idea of lowering the heat, people say, I'm not letting those surgeons off the hook. This isn't, lowering the heat is not about letting people off the hook. It's putting them on the hook so they can do the work. You guys see the difference? Okay, so you can take a breath and I can take a breath, and I'm going to take your questions. I haven't left a whole lot of time, but what I hope this has got you thinking about is how this adaptive leadership work, dovetailed with clinical quality improvement, can really help you make progress on the work. So this idea is there's a certain amount of tension to make progress. The difference between technical and adaptive work. Now, I want to say technical work isn't bad, it's just insufficient. There will be technical pieces to your projects, to the projects that you envision. But there's this human work. I've literally had people ask me in leadership courses, okay, I like leadership, I want to do that. Is there a job without people? I've been asked that. And the answer is no. Okay? That's what makes this hard. But it also, you know the human experience. This is about reading and seeing it so you can make progress on work that matters. So seeing the difference between technical and adaptive, and actually what we see in our teams is what I've just done with you today is typically the morning content of day 3 of our 9-day courses. And this comes after they've kind of struggled with their aim statement a little bit and kind of gone out there and said, oh, what did I sign up for? And they're like, oh, I get it. It's supposed to be hard. And then they're not feeling like they're a failure. Okay? Difference between authority and exercise of leadership, helping people be more effective in using their influence. Everybody wants that. Not just people who sign up for quality improvement teams. People want to be more effective, be able to be more convincing to folks. Reflecting in action, helping people not create mayhem wherever they're going, but to actually use, to see how things are going and to use themselves effectively. And then this idea of reading resistance as something that's useful to instruct you what happens next. So where this all lands, I'm going to give you a quote from one of my mentors, Parker Palmer. He said, organizations are illusions. They're just groups of relationships. That's the work, it's that relationship work, to leverage that, to see what's happening, to do this work in our profession in new ways. And it's hard. Okay, so what questions do you have for me? We still got time, and not that much time, but what questions do you have? Did I just like stun you so you can't speak? Yes, Ross.
So Val, thank you
Should I repeat that in the mic so people in the audience can hear? He said insightful, inspiring. Okay, yes, go for it.
There's this worry that some people will never go into the zone, right?
Yep.
They are committed to stay outside of the zone.
Okay.
And they're not willing to respond to leadership. Do you think that's the case? That's a rare case?
Okay.
If so, how do you deal with it?
Okay. So the question was that there are those people out there who just will not come into the zone, and how are you ever going to really do that? And is that a real factor or not? And this is what I would say. I don't think it. I think it is a real experience, and it is something that this work can actually speak to in powerful ways. Because I think most of the time, that kind of behavior, the heat is really, really high, and the work hasn't been framed in a compelling way. So people really don't understand what they're being invited to, and don't have any sense of how they could be competent as contributors to that work, and how that work could possibly be something that is already part of how they do their work, and that this new work will in any way recognize all the good things they do already. So I really think your question is a great one, and to me it's a real, we frame this as, I think it's really a need where you need to lower the heat, and you need to see, is a little bit of engagement to break down the work make a difference, then do more of that. So I think, are there some bad actors who just want to ruin your day? Yeah, probably. But most of the time, it's actually really not mindful enough. We're not mindful enough in how we're framing the problem and really inviting people to come in. And I think this idea of working with stakeholders and really seeing who they are, and remembering that stakeholders are people who really don't want to see things happen. I mean, think back to Tommy Douglas. Think about, to get his work done, what he did so well is engage people who were against him. And not to change their mind, but help them see a bigger picture. And to see, I mean, I just remember the one scene that I saw was the guy who was actually the prime minister when he was premier. He thought I wish I could say his name. I'm not that good at history. I'm really at my learning edge right here now, guys. But what happened in this conversation was Douglas framed the challenge of the health of the public big enough that, and this guy had his mother cared for in Saskatchewan. He was in Ottawa in his formal role as prime minister, but his mom was being cared for in Saskatchewan. And she got to stay at home and die in her home province. And that mattered to him. So he helped a guy he usually opposed do a bigger, the bigger work of Medicare for all of Canada. And I mean, I think that's an example where part of the leadership work is to check our own assumptions and not write off some of those people that have ruined our day for a long time. So it's a great question, but I think that this is your question that you just asked comes up almost every time we bring the teams back together for a meeting, each month. We have a deep check-in to talk about how things are going and what they've learned engaging their stakeholders. And this question often comes up. I tried talking to the neurosurgeons and it just doesn't go very well. Well, what'd you do? And then it's really kind of trying to tell the story and get ideas. But I think most of the time you can work with it, but it's hard. Yeah.
I love the definition of disappointing people at a rate they can tolerate, surprisingly similar to marriage.
Yeah. This works at home, I'm telling you. I'm telling you.
The question
Yeah.
is when you want to turn down the heat and break a problem down,
Mm-hmm.
I picture in my head right now problems that I wouldn't be able to figure out how to break it down into smaller chunks, and slowing it down wouldn't
Okay.
lead into it. There's this step.
Yeah.
And so to what extent
Great.
does the leader let the team or ask for the team helping them to break that down
Great.
into bite-sized chunks?
Great. Okay, so the question is thinking about lowering the heat. So when I sort of framed that conceptually, when I said basically validate and acknowledge loss, simplify, clarify, restore, add or restore resources. It doesn't mean do all of those. That's kind of a suggestion box of how to branch off from there to what I might try next. So in your case, when you can't break the problem down, what you did very nicely is to say, this is what I see. Help me think about that. Because what you're doing actually is you're basically saying this is hard. You're acknowledging that this is difficult. And let's take the time together to talk about how we might tackle this. I mean, that adds the resource of your attention, of slowing it down and being curious. That's a heat lowering thing. Because you're not saying, what's wrong with you? You can't see what I see, that you're, how to make this step. So in other words, the ideas about lowering the heat isn't you do all three of those things to lower the heat. That's kind of a menu for you to kind of branch off to think about what might I do. Yeah, and what I invite you all to do is just an exercise in your own life is, you know, maybe not while you're driving tonight because I want you to be safe, but when you can think about it, say, okay, when the heat's high, what have I done, you know, or when the heat's low, what have I done, and just think about you have to really do that multiple times in a day. You're doing it all the time. The adaptive, the part I hope that I've added to your awareness tonight is when you do something, say, did that make things better or worse? And if it made things better, keep going that way. But if it made things worse, stop that. And most of us don't practice leadership very mindfully. We practice it reflexively. We have a favorite behavior, and we say, this is my leadership. I just yell at people. And if they don't do anything, I find people who I haven't yelled at for a while, and I can yell at them for a while. Make sense? Maybe one more question? Did you have one? Yes.
What this did was reinforced to me something that I sort of know, but I also just recently there was an article in New York by Ulstad talking about the importance of relationships
Yep.
in quality improvement.
Yeah.
And what it's making me think about is this push often to do things at scale. And I'm just interested in your comments about whether you think you can actually test something out and then push it out at scale, given the importance of it.
Yes. Okay. So the question was, thinking about Atul Gawande's recent article in New Yorker about pushing great new practices to scale. And what I would say is this, is yes, but pushing things to scale is still adaptive work. It's not technical. Okay? So you don't, so I think you're hitting the nail right on the head, is that, you know, you and your team might develop relationships and do some new things, okay? And then it's really making the case to other folks. But the data you gather, the way you talk about your data, the way you show what you've learned can help. I mean, there's a flywheel effect. I mean, you can go faster, okay? But you're absolutely right. There's different leadership work. It's the same stuff, but I mean, there's the same kind of work in taking it to spread. So at Aligner right now, we're thinking about a sort of a next cohort after the initial cohort. So we've had 6 rounds of 10 teams. So now we're thinking about a cohort of some of the teams that really have projects to spread, and what's that going to take. So it's some of the same things. It's different stakeholders, because usually it's in our system, it's hospital presidents, and it's clinical service lines. It's trying to think about across, you know, people who are usually competitors, saying we're inviting you to do things the same, and they're like, are you kidding? Even though they're already doing things the same, of course, and they could. So it's different work, but it doesn't turn spread into technical work. I think that was the essence of your question. I think what it does is it prepares you for the hard work of spread. It doesn't make spread easier. Okay. Read me a question. Okay. Okay.
Can we read that out?
Yes. Why don't you read it? Because I can't quite focus.
So we do have a question from someone on the web. So it's Alan Katz. He said that a question from the shores off of International Falls, Minnesota, Fort Francis, Ontario. Great presentation, Dr. Ulstad. I get the sense that most of your presentation was geared to internal organizational relationships. I was wondering if you have any advice to applying adaptive leadership techniques when dealing with peers among multiple organizations.
Yes. I mean, I think thank you for your question. I think what's true is, I think this all works. What I'd say to your question is, it's how you frame the problem. I think that when there's multiple organizations, it's how you think about your stakeholders. I mean, it's really, what is my problem, and what are the perspectives? So the perspectives might be organizations, they might be specialties, they might be, you know, this is true even outside of healthcare. So I think, yes, it's really a question of how you frame the problem and how you think about the stakeholders. So what we do, just to kind of give you a taste of this, and maybe it's a great segue to Ross, because he's moved to the front row now, so I know I'm about to get the hook, is the next thing we do after we talk about these 5 ideas, we talk about how to move this work through an organization, through a family system, through a problem. And it speaks to your question and the questions from the audience. We think what we say, there's 4 questions. What is the work? Okay, what is it we're trying to do? who cares about it? So who are the stakeholders? And it's not just the people who agree, it's the people who are scared, it's the people who disagree. So who cares about the work? Stakeholder analysis. Lots of work with stakeholder analysis. Okay, so that's the second question, is who cares about it? The third question is how are those stakeholders feeling about the work? And so we have people make their list of stakeholders and say, is the heat high? Are they in the zone? Or is the heat low? We don't know for sure, but that's where they're going to start with their next intervention. Okay, and then we talk about what do you do next? And we talk about raising and lowering the heat, what you can do. So yes, I think that works no matter whether you're talking about an organization, a family, a province, a country. Ross.
Thank you, Val. And I think the thing I took away tonight is that we have, in this country, and I think elsewhere as well, seen some of the challenges of quality improvement being technical challenges. What's the right tool? And if we're not making progress, is there another tool that we can use? And really, I think you've helped us to see that it's not just a technical challenge, it's a challenge of working with people and helping to frame this initiative in a way that's possible for them to contribute to it. So thank you very much for giving us that insight, and really appreciate this rich opportunity to now rethink the way in which we approach this work. Thanks to everybody here and on the web for being part of this, and for giving up some of your time to come and contribute to this work as well.